In the annals of the British monarchy, where every step is meticulously calculated and every word carefully weighed, an event has occurred that is truly astonishing. After years of mysterious silence and evasive answers, Buckingham Palace has finally released a series of documents that once and for all determine the future of Archie and Lilibet. These are not merely rumors or speculations picked up by the tabloid press. These are official papers, fully legally binding, enforceable, and, most importantly, final. With this decisive action, the Crown has ended years of ambiguity, sending a signal whose coldness and unequivocal nature exceed all expectations. Meghan and Harry's children are now stripped of their right to a royal identity. For astute observers, this move appears to be a genuine political earthquake within an institution that, for centuries, has been built upon unshakable rituals, strict hierarchy, and ancient traditions. Since Archie's birth in 2019, and Lilibet's in 2021, the status of both children has consistently been a subject of endless speculation and gossip. While the offspring of Prince William and Duchess Kate were immediately entered into official documents with all due symbols and honors, a noticeable silence was maintained regarding the Sussex children. This evident disparity was actively discussed in the past by both the British and international press. Speculations ranged from subtle political calculations to deliberate distancing. However, as long as the palace remained silent, there was always room for various interpretations and conjecture. But now, the situation has fundamentally changed. The palace reacted in its typical, restrained manner, not through interviews or loud public statements, but by publishing documents that will take their place in the archives. Sources close to the monarchy report that these are not temporary measures, but final decrees that will permanently alter Archie and Lilibet's status. With a single stroke of the pen, it was confirmed that these two are no longer recognized as royal heirs. The effect of this decision is twofold. On the one hand, it is undoubtedly a personal tragedy for Meghan and Harry, who have always sought to present their children as an integral part of royal history. On the other hand, it is a powerful signal of authority from the palace, clearly demonstrating that in matters of succession and titles, what matters are not personal stories or emotional attachments, but exclusively centuries-old rules and establishments. Thus, it becomes absolutely clear. Emotions, personal appeals, or carefully crafted PR strategies are utterly irrelevant in this matter. As historians and chroniclers of past eras emphasize, it is precisely during periods of profound upheaval and uncertainty that the monarchy often turns to the unshakable power of official papers, to the rigor of documented proof. While spoken statements are often prone to distortion, ambiguous interpretations can be forgotten or deliberately twisted, records fixed on paper form an undeniable reality, becoming an unshakable foundation of truth. This is precisely the scenario unfolding in the current situation. With the emergence of these official papers into the public sphere, a fundamental re-evaluation of the children's status and identity occurs, affecting not only their present position, but also how they will be perceived by future generations. The majestic repositories of the royal house, these silent witnesses to history, have for centuries served as an inexhaustible source of the monarchy's collective memory, its family tree, and its chronicle. An individual whose name is for any reason absent from their pages loses not merely a formal title, they are effectively erased from the historical context, losing their connection to the greatness and continuity of the lineage. The question of the profound consequences of these events for the royal family itself, for its internal foundations and future, logically arises. After their high-profile move to the United States of America, Meghan and Harry repeatedly expressed their firm conviction that their offspring should be raised away from the strictures and dictates of royal institutions, yet retain their inherent right to the status of heirs to the throne. This was particularly true for Prince Harry, who, having himself been caught for many years between an inevitable sense of duty to the dynasty and a desire for individual freedom, harbored a sincere hope that his children could somehow maintain a certain, albeit indirect, connection to the crown. Now, with the official appearance and publication of new documentary evidence, this cherished idea, seemingly firmly rooted in his mind, appears to be definitively shattered, transformed into an unfulfilled dream. Concurrently, these events shine a spotlight on the deepest contradictions between age-old traditions and the currents of a rapidly changing modernity. In the current era, when British society demonstrates increasing diversity, when principles of equality and inclusivity are actively discussed at all levels of public discourse and become crucial guiding principles, the palace's decision is perceived by some observers as a clear regression, a return to outdated, archaic models of behavior and thinking. Opponents and skeptics question with bewilderment. Could the Crown not have shown foresight and demonstrated its readiness for modernization by unconditionally recognizing Meghan and Harry's children? Or was the force of institutional pressure so comprehensive and irresistible that any, even the slightest concession would inevitably have been interpreted as a sign of weakness, a signal of a possible undermining of centuries-old foundations? The situation's pronounced international context lends it particular urgency and potential for conflict, making it truly explosive. While in the United States a significant portion of the public tends to view Meghan and Harry as innocent victims of an archaic and inflexible institution, on the shores of the United Kingdom, the palace's decision is often presented and actively defended as an absolutely necessary measure aimed at preserving age-old order and stability. This striking, at times diametrically opposed, difference in perception clearly demonstrates how fundamentally different criteria are used to evaluate the monarchical system and its centuries-old traditions on opposite sides of the Atlantic. Leading European media outlets, such as the authoritative British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, or the German public broadcaster Deutsche Welle, emphasize in their reports and analytical materials that the current situation is not just another chapter in a series of family conflicts, but also a litmus test showing how successfully or unsuccessfully the monarchical institution in the 21st century can withstand increasing global pressure and adapt to new realities. The decision made undoubtedly rules out any ambiguous interpretations. Archie and Lilibet are officially deprived of their place in the strict royal hierarchy. This step brings a definitive end to a years-long saga marked by countless conjectures, candid interviews, and an incessant stream of media publications that closely followed every twist of this story. However, while Buckingham Palace seeks to provide much-needed clarity, a completely new area of uncertainty simultaneously arises. How will the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Meghan and Harry, manage to incorporate this significant loss into the carefully constructed strategy of their personal brand? Can their carefully cultivated identity as royal rebels endure and maintain its relevance if their children definitively cease to be part of the monarchical system, losing even a symbolic connection to it? For numerous analysts and keen observers of the monarchy, it remains a mystery how this landmark event will affect the already fragile relationship between members of the royal family and the Sussex couple. Will a new wave of tension arise, and will past conflicts continue, merely exacerbating the existing rift? Or conversely, could such a clear and unambiguous delineation of roles and statuses become a catalyst for achieving an unprecedented form of stability, now that all positions are defined with absolute clarity? One thing is absolutely certain. With this decisive step, Buckingham Palace has marked a truly historic moment, the consequences of which will undoubtedly have a profound and long-term impact on the entire institution of the monarchy, reshaping its future. To fully grasp the true significance of Buckingham Palace's recent decree, we must journey back in time, more than a century ago, to the pivotal year of 1917. In that era, Great Britain was deeply embroiled in the throes of World War I, and the monarchical system was under unprecedented pressure. Questions of national identity, the unwavering loyalty of subjects, and the acute need for clear, unambiguous state structures took on paramount, vital importance. In response to these challenges, the reigning monarch, King George V, took a decisive step, issuing a document that to this day serves as an unbreakable foundation for all rules, without exception, concerning the inheritance of royal titles and rights to the throne. This refers to the famous Letters Patent. This fateful decree, despite its dry, legally precise wording, held immense significance and determined with crystal clarity who exactly could claim the honorable title of prince or princess. These letters patent established three unalterable and fundamental conditions, without the fulfillment of which the acquisition of a royal title was inconceivable. First, it stipulated that the child had to be legitimate and descend from a direct, unbroken line of succession, closely linked to the reigning monarch. emphasizing the importance of blood purity and dynastic continuity. Second, their birth required mandatory official recognition and meticulous documentation by Buckingham Palace, which served as a guarantee of legitimacy and prevented any possible disputes. And third, an indispensable condition was a formal and unbreakable link with the Church of England, underscoring the deep historical ties between the Crown and the ecclesiastical institution, ensuring the spiritual unity of the nation. These principles left no room for liberal interpretations, allowing no exceptions or special rules. Their sole and primary purpose was to ensure the unwavering integrity and stability of the British monarchy for many years to come. For many decades, the letters patent consistently fulfilled their crucial function, acting as an unshakable guardian of the monarchy. They served as a powerful tool designed to protect the institution from any erosion of its foundations, strictly limiting the number of individuals entitled to titles, and thereby preserving the unwavering symbolic significance of the British royal family. Historians unanimously emphasize that such a definition was not merely appropriate, but vitally necessary in the historical context of that time. In an era when many monarchies across Europe were collapsing under the onslaught of revolutions and social changes, the far-sighted King George V laid a cornerstone designed to prevent the loss of clarity and authority of the British Crown. This strategic measure proved decisive, stabilizing the monarchy during periods of profound crises, from the political turmoil of the interwar period to the massive social upheavals of the post-war era, ensuring its resilience and continuity. However, as the world entered the 21st century, this strict set of rules began to be perceived as a rigid, at times archaic, relic of a distant past. Modern societies are undergoing rapid changes, traditional family models are transforming, and the significance of religious ties in public consciousness is gradually weakening. Despite these global shifts, the fundamental essence of the letters patent remained unchanged. Even during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, who was known for her remarkable ability to adapt and modernize, these principles were never repealed. They formed the quiet but extraordinarily powerful foundation of the monarchy, the very foundation that has now manifested itself so clearly in the high-profile case of Archie and Lilibet. It is precisely the application of these ancient rules to the Sussex children that demonstrates why the royal palace acted with such determination and inflexibility. Their births occurred under circumstances that, from the Crown's perspective, categorically did not align with the established and time-honored principles. Archie's birth was clouded by a series of contradictory public statements that raised questions and bewilderment, and Lilibet's birth, moreover, took place in California, far outside the royal family's usual and traditional environment. To these circumstances were added equally important questions related to church ceremonies, which also deviated from strictly defined traditional standards. For the general public, such details might have seemed secondary or insignificant, but for the institution of the monarchy, they held and continue to hold fundamental, paramount importance. Political scientists unanimously note that with this decisive step, the Crown not only maintains internal order and strict hierarchy within its ranks, but also sends an unequivocal, clear signal to the entire outside world. In an era when the institution of monarchy in many countries is subjected to serious doubt and criticism, the British Crown is obliged to constantly demonstrate its adherence to and strict observance of its own laws and traditions. According to this logic, even the slightest exception to the rules can create a dangerous precedent that, in the long term, is capable not just of shaking, but of completely undermining the entire carefully constructed structure of the monarchy. It is also interesting to observe how these stipulations are perceived differently in various parts of the world. In the United Kingdom, many analysts and commentators tend to regard this decision as quite logical and undoubtedly necessary. However, across the Atlantic, in the United States, it evokes more bewilderment and misunderstanding. There, the argument about the immutability of traditions carries much less weight, and principles of equality and openness prevail in the broader public discourse. American observers find it quite strange that belonging to a particular religion or possessing certain formal documents can determine the identity and title of children. It is in this profound divergence that the colossal gap between an age-old institution, rooted in the past, and a modern society, striving towards the future, becomes evident. The fact that the royal palace chose to act at this particular historical moment is by no means a coincidence. The passing of Queen Elizabeth II and the subsequent ascension of King Charles III to the throne inevitably pushed the monarchy to make a series of important and strategic decisions. Questions concerning representation, financial costs, and the overall modernization of the institution inevitably came to the forefront. By referencing the letters patent, the Crown demonstrates not only the continuity of its authority, but also an unshakable resolve to uphold its principles. This message is addressed not only to Meghan and Harry, but to the entire world. The established rules apply to everyone without exception, regardless of anyone's popularity or media pressure. At the same time, such a rigid stance inevitably opens up a broad discussion about the future of the monarchy itself. Can this ancient institution continue to exist in the 21st century, if it relies so heavily on principles formulated back in 1917? Or, conversely, is this very unshakable rigidity the key to its stability and longevity? Opinions among analysts and observers on this matter are diametrically opposed. Some praise the palace's consistency and principled stand, while others warn that such inflexibility risks the Crown completely losing touch with current social reality. Thus, a provocative question remains open. Is it fair that Archie and Lilibet are judged by rules that were created in a completely different historical era, under different circumstances? Or, on the contrary, has the immutability of these rules ensured the monarchy's astonishing longevity and stability? The controversial discussions surrounding Archie did not begin with the recent official palace documents, but much earlier, immediately after his birth in May 2019, when everything still seemed perfectly traditional. An official announcement was made. Photos of the happy parents were published, and there was widespread public joy at the birth of a healthy heir. But soon, a curious detail came into focus, one that still carries deep symbolic significance: the entry on his birth certificate. Initially, Meghan Markle's full civilian name, Rachel Meghan Markle, was listed. However, just a few weeks later, this document was changed. Instead of her surname, it now read, Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Sussex. At first glance, such a change might have seemed an insignificant detail to an outside observer, not deserving of special attention. However, within the intricate workings of the monarchical system, it instantly sparked a wave of speculation and conjecture. The logical question arose: was this merely a formal, routine bureaucratic procedure, one of many that regularly occur within the administrative apparatus? Or was there deliberate intervention by the palace, intended to more forcefully fit Meghan into the strict confines of royal protocol? The Duchess herself hinted that the initiative did not come from her, while sources close to the palace categorically denied any external influence on this process. Ultimately, an impression was created that brought no clarity, but only exacerbated the general uncertainty. For many attentive observers, this incident marked the first noticeable crack in Archie's story as a member of the royal family. It is precisely such seemingly minor, yet in reality highly significant, cracks that play a colossal role in the functioning of the monarchical system. Birth certificates, meticulously kept registers, baptism records, and other official documents are not merely empty formalities. They are the fundamental foundations of an age-old order, the cornerstones upon which the entire structure of the royal house rests. These records provide a continuous chronology, allowing future generations to accurately determine who holds the legitimate right to titles, privileges, and a place in the line of succession. The moment the slightest doubts or inaccuracies arise in these records, the entire system begins to lose its stability and is put at risk. In Archie's case, the record was marred by contradictions from the outset, which inadvertently created distrust regarding his position within the strict hierarchy of succession. The international press eagerly seized upon this incident, making it a subject of widespread discussion. British tabloids spared no expense on sensational headlines, speaking of a deliberate staging. Meanwhile, American media interpreted this change as a clear example of the palace's strict and pervasive control. Leading German media outlets, such as Süddeutsche Zeitung and FAZ, approached the analysis of this case with greater sobriety and objectivity. They pointed out that while various changes had continuously occurred throughout the royal family's history, they very rarely touched upon such a delicate matter as the birth certificate of a direct descendant. What made the situation particularly explosive was that these issues were not limited to symbolic significance. Legal experts noted that alterations to such official documents could have serious legal ramifications, affecting, for instance, matters of inheritance law or the formal recognition of one's position within the royal hierarchy. Thus, what initially seemed like a minor amendment evolved into a significant precedent, one that continues to fuel ongoing discussions about the future of Meghan and Harry's children. Adding to this was the peculiar way Meghan and Harry communicated about the incident and generally positioned themselves. In their numerous interviews, they repeatedly emphasized their distance from the palace and their desire for independence, yet simultaneously used every available opportunity to present their children as an integral part of the royal family. Official photographs, strategically placed media messages, and even hints in their Netflix and Spotify projects, all were intended to maintain a visible, tangible connection to the crown. However, the more they stressed this aspect, the greater the perceived discrepancy between their words and actions seemed to grow. While their public endeavors aimed to demonstrate their children's royal affiliation, official documents continued to raise new questions, undermining that very claim. For those who study history, this situation serves as a vivid confirmation of how rapidly evolving modern media transforms the once unshakable influence of traditional institutions. Just a few centuries ago, subtleties such as a name correction on a birth certificate would have remained known only within a close circle of confidants. Today, however, such official documents are meticulously analyzed, commented upon, and hotly debated across the global social media landscape within hours. In the current digital age, the monarchy simply cannot afford to leave even the slightest inconsistencies unresolved without risking the erosion of public trust. Thus, Archie's birth heralded a new period where personal parental decisions, carefully orchestrated media narratives, and strict institutional requirements entered into a complex and sometimes contradictory interplay. Instead of the anticipated clarity, an entire area of tension emerged, shaping public perception to this day. Even then, many wondered whether Archie could ever assume an undisputed and firm position within the royal family, or if his place was inherently undefined from the very first day of his life. The answer to this complex question, it seems, only became apparent years later in recently disclosed documents. They convincingly demonstrate that the doubts once considered insignificant actually carried considerable weight. From a seemingly minor and confusing alteration in the birth registry, grew a situation that shook the very foundations of Archie's identity within the monarchical system. It thus becomes absolutely clear that this story did not begin with recent decisions, but is rooted in the very first days of his life. What was then perceived as a simple formality, in retrospect, proved to be a profound symbol of the ever-increasing distance between the Sussexes and the palace. And the question remains open. Was this rift inevitable? Or could a different approach from the outset have bridged the gap and prevented the estrangement? When Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor was born in 2021, the palace already appeared to have significantly distanced itself from traditional protocols. While the birth of other royal children typically involved the ceremonial ringing of bells, official statements, and photographs sent to historical archives, this time everything was uncommonly quiet and subdued. The news did not emanate from the heart of London, but from distant California, in the form of a modern, almost marketing-oriented press release, which celebrated the joyous event of the child's birth in enthusiastic tones. For keen observers, this was a truly landmark moment. For the first time in history, a royal child was introduced to the wider public not through official palace channels, but exclusively through the parents' own communication platforms. Within the centuries-old tradition of the monarchy, the birth of a child is perceived not merely as a personal family event, but as a crucial institutional signal affirming succession and stability. Every minute detail of this process, from the official hospital report to the presence of specially appointed royal physicians and the ceremonial baptism, is meticulously documented. This is done with a singular purpose: to indisputably and irrefutably establish the newborn's belonging to the royal family and dynasty. In Lilibet's case, however, this fundamental institutional anchoring was entirely absent. There was no official confirmation from the palace, nor adherence to the necessary formalities that traditionally accompany the preservation of the monarchical line's continuity. Thus, from the very beginning, A kind of vacuum formed around this event, which was immediately filled with numerous speculations and deep mistrust from the public and experts. An even more serious and questionable aspect became the matter of her baptism. Meghan and Harry proudly announced to the world that their daughter had been baptized in California. Published photographs and statements attested to a solemn ceremony that, according to them, fully met their own requirements and expectations. But while the Duke and Duchess of Sussex celebrated this significant moment in their new life in the US, the reaction from London remained distinctly cold and detached. Sources close to the palace unequivocally emphasized that this baptism was not registered in accordance with the generally accepted standards of the Anglican Church, and consequently, could not be recognized under royal protocol. For the monarchy, however, such a baptism represents far more than just a religious rite or spiritual sacrament. It is, in essence, a formal and integral link that securely inscribes a child into the strict order of the Crown and the Church, ensuring their place in the hierarchy. The fact that Lilibet's baptism did not receive official recognition from the palace had far-reaching and highly significant consequences. Instead of strengthening her position within the royal family, this decision, on the contrary, weakened it. From the monarchy's perspective, this constituted a peculiar rupture, depriving Meghan and Harry's children of their direct connection to the central institutions of the Crown. Historians and experts noted that in modern times, such precedents were virtually non-existent. While royal children are traditionally guaranteed a place in history books through lavish ceremonies, official records, and recognizable symbols, Lilibet, in this regard, remained virtually invisible. For Meghan and Harry, this circumstance was a significant blow, with consequences extending far beyond purely formal matters. Their entire public identity and media image were meticulously constructed on the premise that their children were not only their private descendants, but also heirs to a centuries-old royal tradition. Netflix documentaries, numerous interviews, and even their new business ventures thrived on the enduring aura of royal status. However, this aura inevitably loses its power and appeal as soon as institutional support and official recognition disappear. Critics in the British media consistently emphasized that while Meghan and Harry could certainly continue to develop their personal brand, without official recognition of their children, the very foundation upon which they built many of their projects and ambitions vanishes. This turn of events inevitably exacerbated the existing divergence between their idealized public image and the harsh reality of their situation. While media on the American continent continued to feature exclusively positive headlines, extolling the couple as the embodiment of a modern, independent pair, European press, conversely, increasingly voiced open criticism regarding the lack of official recognition for their children. Commentators, particularly in Germany and France, viewed this situation not merely as an internal family scandal, but as striking evidence of how profound the conflict had become between centuries-old traditions and the demands of modernity. The monarchy, it seemed, steadfastly clung to its immutable rules, while Meghan and Harry attempted to construct their own unique reality, an experiment that, as it turned out, was destined for an inevitable clash of interests. From a broader geopolitical perspective, this case reflects a major trend characteristic of the 21st century: the question of how established institutions cope with the challenges of globalization and migration. Children born on a different continent, whose lives are no longer tied to traditional structures, pose a serious challenge to a monarchy spanning centuries. Should it demonstrate flexibility, adapt, and recognize new forms of belonging, or should it stubbornly adhere to old rules to preserve its historical legitimacy? Lilibet's baptism thus transforms into a symbolic embodiment of this fundamental contradiction. It clearly illustrates how far apart the worlds of California and London are, and this refers not only to geographical distance, but also to deep institutional and cultural differences. For Meghan and Harry, this event was an expression of their desire for self-determination, while for the palace, it seemingly held no significant meaning. Between these two poles lies a gaping void that will undoubtedly continue to influence public perception for the foreseeable future. Thus, a pertinent question arises. Was Lilibet's baptism the moment when the final separation between the Sussexes and the Crown was irrevocably cemented? Or is there still a real possibility to build bridges before the chasm becomes truly insurmountable? With the births of Archie and Lilibet, and the conflicting reactions from the palace, a new, fundamentally different phase began in Meghan and Harry's lives, a phase where their very identity came under serious scrutiny. While in the United States they positioned themselves as an independent, progressive couple, their public image nonetheless remained closely tied to the crown. Meghan skillfully positioned herself as a royal mother, and Harry as a prince who, though he had left the institution, remained inextricably linked to it by blood. However, with the latest decisions made in London, this carefully constructed narrative begins to lose its original essence. The foundation of their brand had always been a unique combination of centuries-old traditions and audacious rebellion. They were not just another pair of celebrities, but figures who were simultaneously part of a centuries-old institution, and yet its critics. It was this internal contradiction that made them extraordinarily interesting to the media, major publishers, and numerous streaming platforms. But what will remain of this unique image, if the palace now unequivocally states that their children will not bear royal titles, and will not have? What then will be their place in the annals of official history? The position of a royal rebel truly functions only as long as the crown grants them its recognition. If that recognition fades, then Meghan and Harry inevitably transform into ordinary celebrities, like many others, basking in attention, but devoid of true significance. For Meghan, in particular, this development represents an existential challenge. Her numerous projects, from creating a lifestyle brand to running social media campaigns and forging collaborations with various brands, until recently thrived exclusively on the aura emanating from the royal family. Even subtle hints of royal affiliation, whether through visual imagery, turns of phrase, or symbolism, lent her products a unique exclusivity, unavailable to other public figures. Without this institutional backing, that added value could very well evaporate. Already, observers note that some corporations are re-evaluating the terms of their collaborations with the Sussexes. The reason is straightforward. A brand built on shaky and undefined narratives carries an obvious risk for potential sponsors. Harry, too, increasingly finds himself facing a personal dilemma. His autobiography, Spare, garnered him immense attention in the short term, but simultaneously burned bridges that will be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to rebuild. And while the candor regarding internal family conflicts was initially perceived as an act of considerable courage, in retrospect, it backfired. Critics now accuse him of having lost his credibility due to these sensational revelations, and his family's subsequent silence has been interpreted by many as an eloquent, if unstated, commentary. Now, with his children stripped of institutional recognition, he is forced to confront a painful question. Has the price for distancing himself from the royal court proven too high? Compounding this is the widening gap in public perception of them between the United States and Europe. While Meghan and Harry still find refuge in progressive media in the US, which portrays them as victims of an outdated system, sentiments in the UK are becoming increasingly critical. There, the couple is increasingly seen as calculating and overly theatrical. This discrepancy makes it extremely difficult for them to develop a unified and consistent brand message. They risk appearing contradictory in the eyes of the international public. On one hand, lauded; on the other, resolutely rejected. The consequences of such perceptions are vast and profound. In the modern digital age, where audience reach and impeccable information credibility serve as key currencies, a loss of consistency in public image can have fatal consequences for any brand. User comments on social media, actively shared hashtags, and viral memes create a dynamic that is exceedingly difficult to manage. The more frequently terms like staging or victim narrative become associated with the Sussex couple, the more firmly this image takes root in the collective consciousness. Even if they launch new projects, their interpretation risks being distorted through the lens of an already established negative perception. Experts in media economics often compare their current situation to that of a startup that experienced overly rapid growth. In the initial stages of such an enterprise, there's immense enthusiasm, significant investments are made, and hope is nurtured that the chosen business model will prove its viability. However, if the fundamental foundation proves insufficiently robust, the entire structure inevitably begins to falter. In Meghan and Harry's case, this foundation is their unbreakable link to the monarchy. If this connection is definitively lost, their entire public construct will lose its support. Yet, despite the obvious complexities, the situation remains ambiguous. There is a perspective that this very final break could present them with a unique opportunity. Freed from the heavy burden of royal expectations, Meghan and Harry could rebrand themselves, positioning themselves not as rebellious royals, but as independent individuals, actively advocating for important topics such as diversity, mental health, or modern family structures. To do so, however, they would need to take a radical step and accept that the past should no longer serve as the central reference point for their identity. A legitimate question arises. Will Meghan and Harry find the courage to reinvent their brand, or will they remain trapped in a role that, without official recognition from the crown, is steadily losing its power? The definitive break occurred with such unexpected force that it managed to surprise even the most experienced and perceptive observers. Buckingham Palace, maintaining complete silence, officially registered documents that definitively excluded Archie and Lilibet from the line of succession. This meant the complete absence of any titles, official roles, or even mentions in monarchical archives. This radical step carries not only formal but also profound symbolic significance. In a monarchy that derives its power and authority primarily from centuries-old rituals and strict documentation, such an exclusion carries significantly more weight than any overt public criticism. It was not a loud scandal or a public accusation, but the quietest and yet most severe form of distancing imaginable. With a single stroke of the pen, the children's names were erased from the annals of the monarchy. Experts and historians draw parallels with past upheavals, such as the abdication of Edward VIII or the conflicts surrounding Princess Diana's divorce, but emphasize the unprecedented radical nature of the current decision. While previous scandals were personal dramas, the current verdict extends to an entire generation, which has now been removed from the established royal order. For Meghan and Harry, this rupture in relations carries a far deeper meaning than the mere loss of symbolic attributes. Their self-definition as rebellious royals was predicated on the monarchy, despite all emerging contradictions, continuing to hold them within its orbit. The rebellion itself was fueled by the existence of the institution against which it was directed. But what will remain of their former status if this institution ceases to recognize them? Without titles, and without any official affiliation, their carefully constructed narrative risks collapse. From irreconcilable opposition figures, they transform into ordinary celebrities, and the world of show business, under ruthless global competition, is full of interchangeable figures. The palace's verdict carries a profound, inherent message. This move demonstrates that when it comes to upholding established order, personal narratives, carefully crafted media strategies, and even international sympathies play only a secondary role. The institution of monarchy strictly adheres to its own immutable set of rules, and those who do not conform to this rigid structure are inevitably removed from it, no matter how painful such an exclusion may be. In doing so, the crown protects not only centuries-old traditions, but also its unwavering authority. At a time when the legitimacy of monarchical institutions worldwide is being questioned, such a firm stance can be seen as a display of strength, yet it simultaneously carries significant risks, for there is a possibility it will be perceived as ruthless and overly conservative. Across the ocean, in the United States, this news, quite predictably, sparked a wave of indignation. Many commentators described the event as an act of inhumanity and accused the crown of turning Meghan and Harry's children into innocent victims of institutional ruthlessness. In contrast, on the British Isles, the verdict was met with clear approval. Here, it was interpreted as a vital clarification, intended to safeguard the succession of the royal house from potential misunderstandings and uncertainties. This polarized perception once again clearly demonstrates the profound differences in how the institution of monarchy is viewed on both sides of the Atlantic. For the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, whose fate is inextricably linked to public opinion, their current position remains highly uncertain and fragile. They built their entire public identity on a close connection to the royal family, but that link is now severed, placing their personal brand at a critical crossroads. If Meghan and Harry aim to maintain their position at the center of global public attention, it is vital for them to develop an entirely new platform for their existence, one that does not depend on the crown's influence and authority. However, such a radical reorientation, while seemingly logical, proves significantly more complex in practice than a mere declaration. Throughout their journey, the primary value they held in the eyes of the public was their proximity to the ancient institution of monarchy, a privilege they have now lost. Consequently, the key question is not just how Meghan and Harry will cope with and process this loss, but also how the global community will react to their every subsequent move. Will sponsors, business partners, and numerous fans continue to support and follow them once the royal aura completely dissipates? Or will interest in them gradually wane once it becomes clear that their children hold neither titles nor official status within the monarchy? The consequences of this decision will undoubtedly extend far beyond the immediate royal family. This decisive step by Buckingham Palace could potentially set an important precedent, clearly demonstrating that the monarchy is prepared to take the most severe and uncompromising measures when its own integrity and continuity are at stake. Simultaneously, it could significantly fuel and intensify public debate about the necessity of modernizing the royal institution. A legitimate question arises. Can an institution that excludes children from its order based on strictly formal rules be considered truly relevant and in tune with the spirit of our times? Or, conversely, is this unwavering strictness and adherence to tradition the very guarantee of its survival and stability in the challenging 21st century? Thus, a whole chapter in the history of the monarchy, one filled with countless speculations, high-profile interviews, and resonant documentaries over many years, draws to its logical conclusion. By deciding to fully exclude Archie and Lilibet from the official royal line of succession, the Crown unequivocally and decisively declared its principles. That established order stands above all else. Protocol carries more weight than fleeting popularity, and centuries-old traditions take precedence over any personal stories and experiences. For Meghan and Harry, this verdict signifies perhaps the most significant and profound turning point since their voluntary departure from active royal life. Perhaps it also heralds the beginning of their definitive new start, one intended to be completely free from any royal ties and obligations. Buckingham Palace's final decision to exclude Archie and Lilibet from the official royal line of succession can rightly be considered a landmark, historic turning point in the monarchy's recent annals. What had remained in a state of uncertainty for many years, generating endless rumors, numerous interviews, and various speculations, has now received its official confirmation in writing. Meghan and Harry's children are now definitively stripped of their status as direct heirs to the royal throne. This decision represents not only a profound personal blow to their parents, but also a powerful institutional signal, demonstrating with unprecedented clarity the Crown's unwavering adherence to its own centuries-old rules, regardless of media influence, public opinion, or momentary emotions. The basis for such a decisive step is rooted in historical documents, specifically, the Letters Patent of 1917, issued by King George V in the midst of World War I. These legislative acts unequivocally established who precisely held the right to bear the titles of Prince and Princess, and outlined strict conditions that had to be rigorously observed. In the realities of the 21st century, such rules might seem like an archaic relic of bygone eras, yet their legal force remains undeniable to this day. For young Archie and Lilibet, even the most minor deviations from these prescriptions, whether ambiguities in birth certificates, the absence of necessary official documents, or an unrecognized christening, served as the starting point for a chain of events, culminating in their definitive exclusion from the circle of titled individuals. For the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Meghan and Harry, these consequences promise to be far-reaching and transformative. Their carefully constructed identity as royal rebels loses its fundamental support as soon as their children are stripped of official status. Without this elusive yet powerful royal aura, they are destined to occupy merely one of many celebrity positions in the endless global media circus. Yes, it will be rich in public attention, but it will lack the uniqueness that once set them apart. Their meticulously cultivated brand, which until now relied on a paradoxical blend of ancient traditions and daring rebellion, now urgently requires profound re-evaluation if it wishes to remain viable. The pressure to urgently find a new, compelling narrative for the public is immense. At the same time, The palace's decision reflects a broader and more fundamental discussion. Should the monarchy in the 21st century demonstrate flexibility and actively adapt to rapid social changes, or does its true strength lie precisely in an unyielding adherence to old, time-tested rules? In the United States, many critics perceive this exclusion from the royal family as an act devoid of any human warmth or empathy. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, in the United Kingdom, a significant portion of society, conversely, welcomes such clarity and certainty. This sharp division of opinion eloquently demonstrates how diametrically opposed the assessments of this ancient institution are, on different sides of the ocean. The future of the Sussexes remains shrouded in uncertainty. Will Meghan and Harry succeed in successfully separating their public brand from the Crown's influence and building an entirely independent and solid foundation for their existence? Or will the distancing by the palace inevitably weaken their reputation and influence in the long term? One thing remains undoubted and absolutely clear. With this decisive step, the monarchy has drawn a line whose clarity leaves no room for doubt. Society is left to question whether the Crown's strict adherence to outdated rules was absolutely necessary, or if a more modern and inclusive approach could have lent the monarchy greater trust and legitimacy in the eyes of its subjects.